So I'm re-recording Musicus because the audio was ass. So anyways, this one's about Musicus. It's the final VN from Overdrive. And you can feel that because it doesn't have an opening. And that's like a normal comic shit for most VNs. I'll be mentioning Kirkir around in a few areas since it's where it all began, and it's actually my favorite. You don't necessarily need to read Kirkir first, but there's subtle references while also having like a particular important character, Yagihara, that originates from there. I'll bring up Teardrops a little bit, but honestly it doesn't really affect music like Kirkir does. So I gave this an 8. The overall raw quality and themes are much more consistent than Kirkir, yet still somehow manages to be obtuse at points and provides a lot of background info that is somehow less relevant than what Kirkir did during her summer tour. So this is the future edit to remove this tangent where, even though the score is an 8 for me, it's more of a simplest one where if you don't care about any of the nitpicks, then it becomes an 8, but I lent it more as a 7.5 at most. There's gonna be minor spoilers everywhere. I'll do that YouTube notation thing just to note where it is. Before even going to the plot summary, it's just easier to say each title has their main character in a different starting point. Kirkir has this wishy-washy guy that has no knowledge on music, ends up forming or joining a punk band for a school event with the rest of the literature club that he was ghosting for like a couple months. So they do their own punk rock show and end up doing this summer road trip and playing in venues and introducing this more pure version of what punk really means. It was pretty cool, but also I read this like 10 years ago, so maybe it's not as good as I thought it was. But it's not meant to be a new lifestyle, it's just a new experience, something new they can do and have fun with and then go back to the grind and go to school again. Teardrop has this pro who's denying the path only to get sucked back in a different genre and eventually gets closure of what's ailing him. Musicus, on the other hand, has the serious kid that's more logical and robotic than anything else, and just wants to continue the family profession, only for some unfortunate events that gets him kicked out of school, and eventually Yagihara invites him to a live performance for his writing piece, and the performance impacts him harder than anything he felt before, thus causing this inner turmoil between staying on this narrow road of just being a doctor or changing his whole career path to becoming a musician. The overall tone is the heaviest of the three, and it's more focused on how shitty everything just can be, sometimes to the point that it's just being hammered in for too long and it just gets annoying. The art is subjective, it's not as clean as Teardrops, and it's not as charming as Kirkir for me, but I read it like almost 10 years ago. The music is in the same bag. I gave Teardrops more or less the coldest reception. And whilst Musicus has some bangers, I still put Kirkir on top. But in terms of the BGM I can remember, Musicus has 2 or 3 tracks that are, from what I recall, better than some of the routes. There's one track called Destruction that tops almost all of them, to the point I wish there was multiple versions of it because it would make sense. There's also Untitled, but that's spoilers everywhere. But also the same thing, and you can say maybe that's the final version what Destruction could be. And in terms of transitions during band performances, I think it's the worst of the 3. I think the fan favorite traffic would be Guru Guru, and it's hard to disagree. It has an emotional tie to a few routes that basically puts it as the title's theme song. But from what I've seen, I think people sit on a couple of the tracks actually pretty good as well, like A Song to Start With, since that's a good tie into any of the pads, and also could be specifically a theme just for K. And there's others that have a similar force like Pandora or Magic Orb, but they all reflect this dumb choice near the end of the 4th route. And this is just nostalgic bias, but I liked Everlasting the best, but it's not played in the plot at all. You can also say if you just want a track to listen when you're driving, I think Yagihara's track would be the best one, which I think is stronger. But it's an Endo Masaki track, it's kind of cheating at that point. The most well-written ending is the 3rd one, as it connects points from the Kamen and Ozaki's routes, and the others too in a different sense, but you can just apply that in reverse, to the point that the route should have been called what it was, and I'll mention that in the spoilers. It's better to mention that Route 3 and 4 come from the last choice, so it can be either order, because it's just meant as the final split of what K's doing. To me, the worst route was Meguru, solely because it was middling. I would go as far to say that you can just remove it and it wouldn't change much. All you really need is Route 1, and then either 3 or 4. Even so, I would say just read Route 1 and 3. Like, it has something. It had interesting points into it, it just didn't do anything with it. It was fine, the tracks that inserted was great, and I'm honestly surprised they didn't use some of it for the 3rd route as well. The worst character in terms of personality and screen time is by far Canada. While he doesn't have the worst moments, he has so much screen time that it's to the point where every one funny moment he has, there's like 6 more lines of him being a total tool. He finally becomes a decent person in the 3rd route, which is short-lived since he's back to being a shitty person in Mika's route again. Even with all that, he's honestly one of the most important characters in the novel, since he's kind of a literary device. I don't really have a favorite character, and the ones I'm thinking about aren't important to the plot at all. They're there for like an hour or 2 and they're gone. I think most people, if they're not really sure, I think we'd all just default to Hanai if we have like a major character in there. The pacing is pretty bad at times, but almost never did have to power through it. Though it's worse if you're not into heavy monologues, because it just keeps on going. Especially in between the 2nd and the 3rd and 4th route. And that's where my comment of it being obtuse happens. But it's also kind of nature of NVL. It's pretty shit if everything was spaced out. It's just huge monologues everywhere. A lot of the nitpicky parts just goes to K. I'm not saying it was written poorly, because it wasn't. Everything was understandable, especially when you understand what K is. K is robotic and stilted, so his dialogue will be stilted as well. And you can tell because when any other character is talking, everything is more lively. And eventually you just get used to it, and you don't even notice. So everything after this is spoilers. It's too much of a pain to dance around. So, first route is Ozaki's. It's considered like the normal route, where Kei keeps on his initial plan of just becoming a doctor. I've seen like 1 or 2 people say, yeah, you can just skip it, but don't. Honestly, it's one of the most integral parts of the novel, and especially for the 3rd ending. And also, it integrates better because there's multiple times where Kei just thinks like, maybe I should just quit, nothing's gonna happen. Ozaki's route is just like a longer version of Kirikiri's school section, without the punk hijinks, which I missed. But also there's a huge amount of characters in there. Some of them ended up being one of my favorites, but they're honestly not relevant outside of a few sections near the end. The added drama in there is anything new, you see it everywhere. But it's still well done, and believable considering Kei's attitude towards music. Again, it's just Kirikiri's first section done differently and long. There's a specific character in this route I want to talk about alongside one other character, but I'll leave it to the 3rd and 4th endings because it makes more sense there. And I appreciate the snarky line where in the end of Ozaki's route, Kei saying like, well, in my next life, I'll become a musician, and that leads to the 2nd route. But before actually getting into Meguru's route, I should say that while Musicus is technically about Kei and Mika, there's a huge emphasis on Hanai. I'll talk more about later as well. It's getting kind of annoying to say that. It's just a note to say that Ozaki's route is where Kei is the most detached from Hanai's mindset. Now, Meguru's route is kind of weird, because while she was Hanai's band member, most of the route doesn't have much to do with the rest of the themes to me. At most, she represents the middle ground. She needs music, but she's not going crazy over it. There's no ideal of, I have to make the best music ever. But it's to the point where I could just change her plot for my own taste and it'll still work. And I'll talk about that later. And there was a pretty cool section near the end of the route in Kei's own dreams. It's not important to the plot, but also I can't do it right, so you're just gonna have to read it. It was honestly pretty interesting, and I was surprised it wasn't addressed again later on. In the 3rd route, or Sumi's route, Kei tells Mika to pursue her own opportunity because she can be famous on her own. And since we're here now, I can talk about a lot of crap, this is all spoilers anyway. So for the emphasis on Hanai, they pointed out quite a few times in the plot itself where Kei is just the new Hanai, just Hanai Jr. Every route could have been Hanai if he just chose a different mindset. And that's why I don't really like calling the 3rd route the Sumi's route, when it's more of, this is what Hanai was going through route. where Kei's mindset morphs to something dangerously close to how Hanai feels, while also realizing how much Kei affected him even though he was just trying to help. This also brings back the part in Ozaki's route where she loved her dad even though he devolved into this useless piece of shit and inserted all his energy and soul into his paintings. And whilst Kei was shitting on him in his own thoughts for doing that and for causing all this trouble for her family, he becomes the same thing. That Hanai was the same thing. That what Sumi is doing to Kei is what Kei did to Hanai and what Ozaki and her mom did to her dad. It's to the point where actually having Sumi is kind of redundant. Technically, just placing Ozaki back into his life would do better and cause a better comparison of how fucked up Kei became. So, if I can change gears for a bit, the drummer is called Fuga. He is introduced really late, since she replaces Kazuki, which was the first drummer. Technically, she was already replaced in Meguru's route again with someone from Ray's band. Fuga's funny and has a great part in the third route, but I like it more with different character that had more time. So let's say we swap Kei's position in Ozaki's route from drummer to bassist to put Ogawa as the drummer. Though it kind of affects the first route a little since part of the plot is Kei's learning this new instrument and everybody's being lazy instead and he's getting pissed off. But you could just make him learn keyboard instead or some crap and it'll just work. Contrivances aside, I want to replace Fuga with Ogawa. It'll make sense if you read Ozaki's route and the first part of Sumi's. Fuga's breakdown makes sense, but it also makes sense with Ogawa. And I would have felt it harder with how bad she was originally portrayed and how she depends on music to branch out. So it makes sense why she would be driven to the breaking point if she was in Sumi's route. This could also put Ozaki back in the picture to replace Sumi as well, just so Kei could be there just to fuck her up just as much as her dad did, only for her to support and love him all the more for it and continue his selfish lifestyle. And I don't even know if I talked about Ogawa. She was the bassist in Ozaki's route. She's kind of a recluse and she doesn't do shit until Kanada's like, nah man, let's be in a band. And then she goes and she branches out and has a better social life. So anyways, back to Sumi's route. It's probably what everybody liked. It has Setoguchi written all over it. He was the guy that wrote Kirikira as well. And in this route, it's to the point where Kei has surpassed Hanai and how fucked up he can go, and that he uses the last of his energy to write down his own musical epitome. But instead of a final plea for help, it's just the misery of Kei, with a mishmash of like a song to start with, Guru Guru, or I think it's called Loose, some siren screeching, the wailing of his kid. There might be more in it, that's just the ones I hear. It could honestly be all the tracks in the damn game put into one. And the other point that I think everybody likes in the third route is that Canada is actually done well. Everything is swapped. He's the complete foil for Kei. While Kei was a hardworking one, just responsible for everything in the band that could be potentially big, Canada was always being the loser that was pulling everybody else back. So throughout the plot, it was this constant tug and pull of trying to make one of them relax and one of them at least practice and get a fucking job. At the end, they failed to meet in the middle and did a whole reversal where Kei's even a bigger shit than Canada ever was. Canada has his own band now that's doing well, and he's even asking Kei to join because, well, Kei's not doing shit now. Even though he knows if he adds Kei, it kind of be a mess financially. He has a job, he's taking care of his family, and Kei is just mooching off of everybody he knows so he can continue his own type of music and find the essence of the best music ever, but just creates shit. And it doesn't even have a good ending, and that's what makes it great. And that's kind of what Setoguchi does. And you're like, ah shit, more of this please. And then Sumi's route is done and you get this piece of shit Mika's route, which is boring comparison outside of a few points. It's just them being famous. And then you got some weird ass drama and Mika loses her ability to sing due to this trauma and this acid attack and lives a more normal lifestyle. And Kei accept it as their finale and they just spend their time together. And that's all well done. It's a nice somber one as well. And then Yagihara comes back because he's a beast, and he's finally starting his band again, and he makes his whole new song, which I think was called Be Strong, and it was great. And then when he's playing, Kei's like in his own mind talking to Hanai and having this heart-to-heart talk, leading to another possible Hanai ending where he doesn't drown in his sorrows, where everything is okay, where if he just had his own flower, then maybe things would have been okay. Where it doesn't matter if the music they made could have been explained scientifically and that everything is bullshit that Hanai thinks it is, because they still need it, and how those words don't really change anything, they still want to play. And that leads to Mika saying the same thing before Kei can even say what happened in his mind. And for a last stand, tries to incorporate Yagihara's way of thinking of how there's multiple mindsets of singing too. They could just sing to one person, to everybody, or maybe to just for themselves. So she sings with Kei in mind to prove that she can also make him cry, just as both Hanai and Yagihara did. And then they fuck it all up, so now Mika can sing, doesn't have to think about Kei anymore. It was just needed as like an initial trigger. They're technically broken up because she feels like she's cheating on all the fans and some toxic ass idol stuff. The concept of Dr. Flower, where it was just a joke on Hanai's being a flower and Kei's chosen profession, then evolving to maybe Hanai and Kane looking over Mika and providing everything to see how much she can grow, to finally devolving to symbolism of how a doctor has no knowledge outside of flowers, and so do they have nothing except how to make and perform music. It's a constant theme of continuously improving in composition, creating new songs to not stagnate. Also, Mika can grow and perform in large and large areas. But no, it's all about how everybody in the band are doctors of fucking music because they can't do anything else. These are some notes I thought of adding. I think I wrote the original review like 2 months ago. I should have put this in paper or something, just so it's easier to understand, because I'm just gonna be rambling. But who knows? Like, most of everything I said is still my current mindset. It's just to clarify some things with the fourth ending. Like, I still dislike the fourth route's ending. I just don't like what became of the Dr. Flower symbolism crap. I just feel like it could have done a better job with it. And I still think Ozaki should have taken Sumi's spot for her route as well. So like, for the first one, I think I've said that Canada is one of like Keisuke's foils, and I still believe that, but there's more to it for Canada than that. And it's to the point I changed my mind on how Mika is the flower of Hanai and Kane's eyes. Or that she's the sole like flower concept. Sure, she's the primary focus, yeah, but it's only because she shines the brightest. I still think now that a lot of them were the flowers, honestly. So if we put Canada as one of the potential ones, like, he needed the most care, but he was also the most stunted one in the group, so it's understandable. Like, he didn't have any role models. He was basically alone the whole time, and he's socially awkward to boot. Like, the dude didn't even know that he was left-handed, and he was too poor to get a new guitar. And in the third route, you can consider that, yeah, he bloomed, and he swapped the doctor role with Kei. Like, Ogawa is another one, and that might be the reason why I liked her so much, because she's the most like simplest form of it. Of she wasn't even like a flower yet; she was a damn seed. It's to the point that having a route or even a whole title about characters like Ogawa would be interesting. Like, it would be in the sense of refrain from Little Busters. But at that point, I feel like it'd be closer to something like Canvas 2, where it's like characters developing their own skill and coming out and being more confident in what they can do. Like, Meguru is a different case. She's an in-between. That's like how her route is. She doesn't need any help, nor does she really help anyone else. She changes a little during the ending of like her route, and I believe she changes overall like after her route as well. And it's like she's better off than Kei, but that also makes her less interesting, because that's how I feel like what she is the whole time. She's just middling. Kei's situation was pretty fucked up, and just made him devolve too far. It basically turns him into like a weed, which is kind of funny. Which goes back all the way to the beginning of the story with Hanai saying that he had to try a lot less early on in his band career. And he was always getting praised, and he gets more praise for his old songs than all his new songs that he spends like sleepless nights working for. And it's a good analogy since like no one really cares how huge your weed is and how much this weed tries to survive in the environment. It's like, yeah, I just want to kill it off. It's not important. And I find this even worse for K, solely that K's like growing period was stunted because Hanai was gone after a while, and that he never like straightened his roots and eventually breaks down when he quits the band and no longer has to play like this doctor role. And since the band is gone, he no longer has them as like a support stick for himself, so he just falls over and just fucks up like everything. Like if the ending wasn't about, oh, we're too dumb to do two things, all we know is music, so we should just enjoy it and keep on going on. And instead of just having it be a realization that everybody goes back and forth from like a support and supporter role, I just would have liked it better. Because it does have the foundation for that. Kei and Mika understand it, but they still break off their engagement because they're like, well, we can handle two things at once and it will just end up divorce if we do it. But they understood how it works. They can do it. That was like their whole development for the last 3 or 4 hours. And it would have been neat if the Dr. Flower title could have changed to like Dr./Flower to resemble it, where it's no longer, oh, Kei has to keep everything together. Mika can now do it as well. Everybody in the team has grown up to the point where there's not just one person that has to keep everything together. Sometimes you'll have some downs and everybody else will help you grow out again. Like it felt like Mika didn't have a huge role into the plot at all, because what she was developing with Kei is kind of gone in the last hour. Whilst like Maguru's concept is still there, Ozaki's concept is there since third route happens. Canada is pretty much always consistent. Mika's the only one where, yes, I developed into this, but also no, we're kind of like back to Hanai again of, no, all we can do is music.